be reading Numbers chapter 16, verses 36 through 38. Again, Numbers 16, chapter 36 through 38. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, to take up the censers out of the blaze, then scatter the fire far and wide, for they become holy. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammer plates as a cover for the altar, for they have offered them before the Lord, and they became holy. Thus they shall be a sign to the people of Israel."
Good morning. Thank you for all of you who are out today, especially our visitors. It's good to see that we have people who have decided to join us today and see what we're all about. And I think you're getting a good idea of that this morning with how we feel that the Bible tells us things should be done, and how we're trying to worship the Lord exactly the way that He has asked us to. And part of our time this morning is dedicated to understanding more about the Word of God. So if you'll turn with me to Numbers chapter 16. Numbers chapter 16. We're going to look at an episode in our Bibles today. The point of this for us as we think about practical lessons for us, we might think, well, this is the Old Testament. But as we look at this man named Korah, and we look at his rebellion, if you'll listen, I'm going to turn, while y'all are turning to Numbers 16, I'm going to turn to the book of Jude, the next to last book of our Bibles. And in verse 11, he says, "Woe to them," these are people who have come in and brought things that were not pertaining to the gospel, things that were perversions of the gospel. He says, "Woe to them, they have gone the way of Cain, and for pay they have rushed headlong into the error of Balaam, and perished in the rebellion of Korah." I'll tell you right now, there was someone who sent me this lesson or brought my attention to it. This was actually a lesson I commandeered a few bits of the lesson from Stephen Deaton, who just finished his gospel meeting over at the Blue Springs Church, the Southside Church of Christ over there. So I took parts of his lesson. I felt like it was a lesson that needed to be taught, and so I took a little bit more of it here. But he started here, and I appreciated him starting here. He also showed us over in verse 3. He said, "Beloved, while I was making every effort to write to you about our common salvation, I felt it necessary to write to you appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all handed down to the saints. For certain persons have crept in unnoticed, those who were long beforehand marked out for this condemnation, ungodly persons who turn the grace of our God into licentiousness and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ." And he compares them to Korah in verse 11. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to chapter 16, and we're going to gain some wisdom from the story here in Numbers. We'll make some practical application, and then the lesson will be yours. When we look at Numbers chapter 16, there's actually two rebellions that are closely connected to one another. In these two parts, the first is, we just call it Korah's rebellion. There's actually 4 men that are involved with instigating this rebellion. But we find that through the first 40 verses of this chapter. And then there's a rebellion that happens on the next day. And that is verses 41 through 50. So we're going to start with looking at Korah's rebellion here. And I'll try to go bit by bit instead of trying to make you read all 40 verses at the same time. But we'll start here in verse 1. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took action. And they rose up before Moses, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. So before we get into what their problem really is here, we see that there are 4 men. Korah, who is a Levite, so he's of the same family as Moses and Aaron, same tribe. And then we have 3 other men mentioned, Dathan, Abiram, and On, who are called Reubenites, sons of Reuben. Okay? These 4 men seem to be spearheading a group that is apparently quite large, 250 other people. 250. This isn't some run-of-the-mill, ragtag, motley crew. These are important people. It actually says, chosen in the assembly, men of renown, at the end of verse 2. These aren't people who are just disgruntled, we're not getting enough attention. These are people who actually have responsibilities. They're chosen leaders of the assembly. And then this idea of men of renown, they have a name for themselves. So these aren't just lowlifes of the people of Israel. I would go so far as to say these are people who knew better. They just didn't do better. So what is Korah's and Dathan and Abiram and On's problem? Before we get into that, though, I do want to point out, notice later when God's judgment is pronounced, for those of you who don't know how this episode ends, I won't spoil it for you, but this man is not mentioned later. So either he just sort of took more of a back seat, he's brought out here, but then as this drags on for the day, that he sort of just takes a back seat. The other option would be that perhaps in their dealings with Moses and Aaron, perhaps this man realized how terrible of a mistake they were making and thus distanced himself from their rebellion before it was too late. We're not sure which one it is, but this is the only time this On, son of Peleth, or son of Peleth, is mentioned. So hopefully, I would like to think that he got a brain into his head and thought better of what he was doing. So what's their problem? We're going to start in verse 3 now. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord?" Whoa. You all are doing too much. Hear this phrase, "you have gone far enough," is that you've taken everything upon yourself, and there's a connotation of this phrase of it's done out of pride. It's been done this way because you can't relinquish power. That's really what they're saying here. And I also want to point out, he says that they have exalted themselves above the assembly, which they have decided all the congregation are holy, every one of them. That's certainly not God's estimation of what's been going on. Amen. God has been saying quite the opposite, actually. And we're going to see both in this section of Korah's rebellion and in the section of the next day's rebellion, God is getting more and more fed up with the people. Far from every one of us is holy. Here's the problem, Korah. You think that. God doesn't think that. And now, see, we already have a problem. This is where we talk in argumentation and in debate, we talk about premises. There's a premise that you are building your case on. Well, guess what? The premise that they're building their case on is all of us are holy, and you're exalting yourself above all the rest of us. We're all holy. Are you sure? Because that doesn't seem to be God's estimate. That's why God is having to put so much on Moses and Aaron. Because the people are not clean enough to do it. They can't keep themselves pure in order to take care of this. Look at verse 4. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. That's not a matter of fainting or anything like that. He's showing humility here. He falls on his face. He's showing humility, which if you don't remember here, Moses is actually called the humblest man to have ever lived. That's actually what God gives him the moniker of. That he names him the humblest man to have ever lived on the earth. So we know that, but Korah apparently doesn't think so. But Moses is going to respond with humility. Instead of responding in anger, he lays himself down on the ground, and then look at how he speaks to them. He spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning, Yahweh will show who is his and who is holy, and will bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. Do this, take censers for yourself, Korah and all your company, and put fire in them, and lay incense upon them in the presence of the Lord tomorrow. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, the sons of Levi." So here, he doesn't respond in anger. He says, okay, if this is really how we want to play this game, God will show us, right? Because we've seen a few different times already, and this will not be the last time, that Moses has to do a lot of this by God's direction. He doesn't always want to have to do this, to do these sorts of things, to take on this amount of responsibility. We've already seen him go to God and say, look, I have taken on too much. And God says, fine, you can appoint yourself 70 elders, and they've been helping him with dealing with the people. So we already see that Moses doesn't want the amount of responsibility that God has given him. He's taking it because God has commanded him to. But whenever he gets a chance, he tries to ask God, can I delegate a little bit more here? Which is far from the pride that Korah and Dathan, Abiram, and On seem to think that he possesses. So he wants to point out here, and I appreciate this here in verse 7. This is what is often the problem. When people want to fight against what is already established, this is often the response or the case that they come up with is, look, you have decided too much. You think that you know what the truth is. And look at what you've done. You've gone above and beyond what God has called you. And here Moses is going to point out, no. You have gone too far. You think I've gone too far? I'm just sitting here trying to do the will of God. No, you are the one who has gone too far. And then he doesn't stop there. Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi. Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister them? And that he has brought you near, Korah and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you? And are you seeking for the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. But as for Aaron, who is he that you grumble against him?" So listen to what he continues to tell them. Look at what all God has given you to do. And we actually see not only is he going to outline here what Korah and his family have been chosen to do. We actually see that later on over in 1 Chronicles. If you turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 9, keep a finger here in Numbers 16 if you want to join me in 1 Chronicles. Shallum, this is verse 19 of 1 Chronicles 9. Shallum, the son of Korah, the son of Ebiasaph, the son of Korah, and his relatives of his father's house, the Korahites, were over the work of the service, keepers of the thresholds of the tent, and their fathers had been over the camp of Yahweh, of the Lord, keepers of the entrance. We also see in 1 Chronicles chapter 26 that they were further the gatekeepers. They had a lot of responsibility, these sons of Korah. And we're going to see Korah had 3 sons. And we see in, did I really not write it down? Numbers chapter 26. The sons of Korah, however, did not die. When they're recounting this episode, 10 chapters later, it tells us that the sons of Korah did not die. He's got sons. They had already been given responsibilities, meaning Korah is older. In my mind, for a long time, I always thought Korah was kind of this younger guy that just wanted more responsibility. But he's got sons who were working, who were fulfilling duties in the tabernacle, which means Korah is an older man. He should know better than this by a long shot, because he's got sons, and clearly his sons, because they'll continue the work after Korah dies. The only thing I could really think of is they don't agree with what their father here is doing. That's why they survive. They're not interested in following the ways of Korah. They have enough to do than to worry about things. We see that in Exodus chapter 6, all the way back in Exodus chapter 6, his sons are already being named, which means that they, at least by that point, were born, all the way back in Exodus chapter 6. Aser, Elkanah, and Abiasaph is how it's spelled here. We already read Ebiasaph. It's the same child. These are the families of the Korahites. They continue on the work here. God doesn't hold them responsible. And we see even too, 2 Chronicles 20 verse 19, the Levites from the sons of the Kohathites and of the sons of the Korahites, which Korah is a son of Kohath, stood up to praise Yahweh God of Israel with a very loud voice. They're part of the worship here. If you look over in Psalms, we see there are psalms from the sons of Korah, and there are songs from the sons of Asaph. Those are both of Korah's lineage. That Asaph is the Abiasaph that we just read about. They'll continue on the work of their father. But Korah thinks that they have done, that they need more responsibility. And with this extended responsibility, what? What else do you want? You're already serving in the tabernacle. It was their job to help with the holy place. And then on top of that, they were gatekeepers. They were the ones who were judging who should go in and out of the tabernacle. And then Moses asks this very interesting question: are you seeking for the priesthood also? And here's another issue that we get into when we try to buck the system that's given to us in the Bible, is that there is a reason God has established the order that he's given. You want the priesthood also? You want something that God has not given you. And that's why people want to see change. They want to take on a responsibility and a duty that God has not provided. And again, they find themselves under the rebellion of Korah. Only Aaron and his sons are supposed to be priests at this time. It's not until they go into the land of Canaan that the idea of priesthood is actually extended to the Levite tribe as a whole. And even then, most Levites didn't even get to serve as priests. They served as in service of the temple and of the tabernacle, but not even as priests. But here's what Moses is really getting to the heart of the matter. You want more responsibility. You want more importance. God has already given you so much. You want more? This is a question that God asks repeatedly to people across the Bible. We're going to see it again with David. Right? Look at everything I've given you, and you had to take the one thing that I didn't give you. You had to take Bathsheba, didn't you? This is a common occurrence for us. God says, here's how I want you to do something, and we say, you know what? I just don't feel like that's good enough. And then we take it upon ourselves to decide what's right, just as Korah and his band have done. But it's not for them. God didn't give it to them. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why. Because God knew the kind of man that Korah was. Clearly, his sons didn't follow suit, a blessing for Korah and for his lineage. So after he speaks to Korah, I love at the end there too, he doesn't bring himself into any of this discourse. Have you noticed that? He doesn't mention himself at all. What he says is, look, we're going to take this up with the Lord. Because as far as I'm concerned, you're going against God. You're not going against me. You're going against God. And then at the end, he tags on, and who is Aaron that you grumble against him? What's he done to you? Really? You're going to bring him into this? He's just over there doing what he's supposed to. And you're going to attack him too. If anybody, you should be attacking Moses, because Moses is the leader. Moses is the one who's in charge right under God. But therein lies the rub, isn't it? He's the one in charge under God. That's who they're going to take it up with. But you know what? At least Korah goes and speaks to Moses. At least he has a spine enough to go do that. Look at the next verses. Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come up. Oh, what a child. What a bunch of children. Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. Are you kidding me? The petulance of these people. And notice that this is where Moses runs out of patience. Moses became angry and said to the Lord, do not regard their offering. I have not taken a single donkey from them, nor have I done any harm to them. That's how you're going to act. You're going to instigate this whole rebellion, and then you're not going to be able to come up and even talk to me. You're not going to actually come and defend your position. You're just going to stand at the doors of your tents and sneer. That's what you're doing. And listen to this revisionist history. You've brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey. Out of a land flowing with milk and honey, where we were abused, our children were taken and thrown into the Nile, or at least slain on their mother's bosom. Where we had slave masters work us all day, even when we couldn't get even close to making the quota that we were supposed to. They hated us, they enslaved us, they did nothing but beat us. But it was a land flowing with milk and honey. And you know what? This is what we do all the time. We have revisionist history of our life outside of the Lord. When God has then given us everything that he could, then we sit there and say, you know, I just really wish I had more. You know what I had back there, before I had to be a Christian, I could do anything I wanted. I had happiness at my fingertips. But you were a slave to yourself. Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. You want to know whose fault that is? Tonight, we're going to talk about Joshua and Caleb, and we're going to look at Numbers 14. Because just 2 chapters ago, we have an answer of why they're not going into the promised land. Guess what? You didn't want to go into the promised land. Notice all of their focus. Where's all of their focus? We want more, and you, Moses, aren't giving it to us. No, God isn't giving it to you. And God isn't giving it to you for a very particular reason. The whole assembly is holy? Really? Just 2 chapters ago, 12 spies were sent out. 10 of them came back and said, I have no faith in God that he's going to help us. And the majority of people said, yep, sounds right to us too. And there were just 2 men who sat there and said, are we missing something? Is there something about God we're not understanding? That very God that defeated Egypt how many times over and has helped us thus far get to where we are and has promised things and has given us those promises and has yet to fail on those promises. Is there something we're not getting? But they're ignored. And guess what? They are delegating the problem. You are my problem. No, I'm my problem. And that's what Dathan and Abiram nor Korah can figure out. Or these other 250 men. And it will not go well. After Dathan and Abiram speak to Moses, I say speak, give their childish response, Moses is going to return to speaking to Korah. Moses said to Korah, you and all your company be present before Yahweh tomorrow, both you and they, along with Aaron. Each of you take his fire pan and put incense on it, and each of you bring his censer before Yahweh, 250 fire pans. Also, you and Aaron shall each bring his fire pan. So they each took his own censer and put fire on it and laid incense on it. And they stood at the doorway of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Thus Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the congregation. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. It says they're standing there with Moses and Aaron. I highly doubt that they cannot hear God pronounce this judgment. I would probably be trying to put my fire pan down and say, you know what, I'm just going to go stand over here, away from the other 249 of you. No, thank you. This was a bad idea. Sorry, God. I'm just going to abandon this. But I think at this point, it's too little too late. Anyway, notice how they respond. Verse 22, they fell on their faces. Once again, humility. O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? Notice here that they respond not only humbly, but in defense of these people that are trying to oust them of their position. Which, of course, I think Moses and Aaron would have given up gladly if God said, I no longer want you to serve me. I'll choose Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Fine. Take it. Let them deal with this mob of the Israelites. But they put themselves between God and the people. Hold on, God. Perhaps we can show mercy. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the congregation, saying, get back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses arose and went to Dathan and Abiram with the elders of Israel following him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart now from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin." So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, one of the few times the Israelites do something smart. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, I hate this, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. How many people are about to be swept up in your stupidity and blindness? Moses said, "By this you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these deeds, for this is not my doing." That's important for later. "If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then Yahweh has not sent me. But if Yahweh brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand these men have spurned" Moses, Aaron, the Lord. As he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished in the midst of the assembly. All Israel who were around them fled at their outcry and said, "The earth may swallow us up." So there's our first sign of God's judgment. You're going to defy me and my will. Here you go. I mean, I hope they didn't fall for long. I hope they didn't have a long time to really think about what they had just done, and that God brought them to a swift end. Verse 35, God's not done. Fire also came forth from Yahweh and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, he shall take up the censers out of the midst of the blaze, for they are holy." The men holding them weren't holy. God's fire certainly made them holy. You shall scatter the burning coals abroad. As for the censers of these men who have sinned at the cost of their lives, let them be made into hammered sheets for a plating of the altar, since they did not present them before Yahweh, and they are holy. And they shall be for a sign to the sons of Israel. So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which the men who were burned had offered, and they hammered them out as a plating for the altar, as a reminder to the sons of Israel that no layman who is not of the descendants of Aaron should come near to burn incense before Yahweh. So he will not become like Korah and his company, just as Yahweh had spoken to him through Moses. Can you imagine every time then you're coming up to this altar to give your sacrifice, there's that reminder of what happens when you defy the Lord. Not only do they now have to slaughter animals to talk about how they've defied the Lord, now they have to look at that altar and see all those censers, 250 people. The very next day. I try not to be too hard on the people of Israel, because I know that every time I'm going to be upset with them, there's probably something I could look at in my own life and say I'm just like them. But come on, the next day, we're going to have more problems. On the next day, all the congregation, verse 41, of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people." I'm sorry, what level of insanity have we gone to? I'm hearing the Twilight Zone music playing. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. It was the day before. And what did Moses say? The Lord is going to do this. The Lord is the one who's going to bring judgment. I can't believe you did that, Moses. It came about, however, when the congregation had assembled against Moses, here we go again, and Aaron, that they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Here we go. We're echoing what we just did yesterday. We're going to blame Moses and Aaron, forgetting just who did the judging. Can you imagine that as they're coming to deal with Moses and Aaron, suddenly the tabernacle is filled with the glory of God? How terrifying is that? Absolutely terrifying. And notice here, Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from this congregation that I may consume them instantly." Uh-oh. Just heard that back in verse 21, didn't we? And then they repeat what they did the day before. Then they fell on their faces. Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put it in fire from the altar and lay incense on it. Then bring it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone forth from Yahweh. The plague has begun." We need to put ourselves in harm's way to protect this people. At first, when you read through this, it seems a bit like Moses and Aaron sort of take it upon themselves to defy God's judgment, and for obvious reasons, that's not what's happening here. But what is happening? And even though God has not given them any sort of command to do so, Moses and Aaron are doing their duty. Moses and Aaron are doing what God has called them to do, which is to lead this people and to be the buffer between God and them. And that's exactly what they're doing. These people who the day before tried to rebel against them, now the next day are rebelling against them, both for completely ridiculous ideas. Now Moses and Aaron are standing in front of a plague, whatever that plague is. It says Aaron runs over. Aaron took it as Moses had spoken and ran into the midst of the assembly, for behold, the plague had begun among the people. So he put on the incense and made atonement for his people. As soon as Moses says it, Aaron runs and does it. I often have a lot of negativity towards Aaron by what I read here in the Pentateuch, but man, this is some quality character from Aaron. And he goes and he holds the plague at bay. He took his stand between the dead and the living, so the plague was checked. But those who died by the plague were 14,700, besides those who had died on account of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the doorway of the tent of meeting, for the plague had been checked. God offers his judgment, but Moses and Aaron shield Israel. Yes, some of the plague affects the people, but Moses and Aaron shield Israel. And I love this image. Not just is it valiant character from Moses and Aaron, just showing their humility and their desire to save these people, no matter how difficult they may be. But now this is archetypal of Jesus, our spokesman, our high priest, standing in between us and the wrath of God. We get this same treatment. You think this is impressive? God's doing both of these jobs by himself. Jesus is taking on both of these responsibilities. So, why are we talking about it? That happened some 3,500 years ago-ish. Why are we talking about it now? I've got 3 points for you. We're not going to read all of these passages. But first off, I want you to understand, everyone has a role to play. And God has given us those roles, whether we truly understand them or not. I don't know why God said, this is the only thing that the sons of Korah have to do. I don't know. Was it because of Korah's character? Was it because of something else? I don't know. But everyone has a role, and God has given us that role. If you turn over to 1 Corinthians 12, we're not going to worry about it right now, but 1 Corinthians 12, beginning in verse 12, we see that that Paul is telling the Corinthian church that we're all a body, one body, and we all have different roles to play. And you know what? The gallbladder is less important than the heart or the brain. My father just had his taken out the other day. Sometimes there are organs that can be removed. But we still all play a role. We all have varying levels of necessity to the body. But in order for it to be considered a body, we need to have them. And Paul is going to go through a great deal of trying to help them understand what that means. And he gets into, does the eye look at the foot and say, you're not an eye, I don't need you? Or does the ear say, I'm not a hand, I'm not useful? We all have our role to play. And when we decide we deserve more than what God has given to us, you're playing a dangerous game. One of which, your two options at the end of the day, three I suppose, is the earth could swallow you up, you could be burned alive with fire, or you can be at peace with the Lord. One of them sounds better than the other two. I won't spoil the answer on which one that is. Lesson number 2, God is very serious about his will. For those of you who are still in Numbers 16, if you actually turn back to Numbers chapter 15, beginning in verse 32, now while the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation, and they put him in custody because it had not been declared what should be done to him. Then Yahweh said to Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, just as Yahweh had commanded Moses. I think God is a little bit serious about his will and how it's done. Moses, you are going to be my spokesman, my prophet. Aaron, you're going to be my priest. Korah, you and your sons are going to serve me in the most holy place. And if you think that's not good enough, take it up with me. And they did, which was a bad idea. God is serious about his will. I like the way Mr. Deaton put it. He said, God is deadly serious about his will. As clearly he's proven in 15 and 16, and as we're going to talk tonight, 14 as well. Apparently the Israelites are having trouble learning that. Lastly, if we begin to complain about God's will and why God has set it up the way he set it up, I don't know why God has set up a lot of the things that he's done. He's tried to help us understand, but I'm not always going to understand why God has done what he has done. But God gave us his will for a reason. And when I decide that I don't like the way God's will is, I'm putting myself in a very dangerous precedent. One that I can see all those who have come before me who have made that mistake, I see how it ends up for them. And I can learn from them. If you'll turn over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. You look at verse 15, and then we'll skip over to chapter 3, verse 6. Notice it says, "So then, brethren, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught, whether by word of mouth or by letter from us." Chapter 3, verse 6. "Now we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from every brother who leads an unruly life and not according to the tradition which you received from us. For you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined manner among you. Nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with labor and hardship we kept working day and night so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to this, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you, so that you would follow our example. For even when we were with you, we used to give you this order: if anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, acting like busybodies. Now such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to work in quiet fashion and eat your own bread. But as for you, brethren, do not weary of doing good. If anyone does not obey our instruction in this letter, take special note of him, of that person, and do not associate with him, so that he will be put to shame. Yet do not regard him as an enemy, but admonish him as a brother." And this is what Moses tried to do. He tried to admonish him as a brother. Korah wouldn't listen. Dathan wouldn't listen. Abiram wouldn't listen. I'd like to think On listened, but I don't know. This is how God feels about those who complain about his will. And I'll point out a more specific example of complaining about God's will is what we saw in the second part of chapter 16, which was complaining about God's discipline. It's one of the things that we probably find ourselves as a church complaining about the most as to how our church functions. The elders don't make the decision to discipline members lightly. And every elder that I've ever spoken to that has a spiritual bone in his body does not take pleasure in disciplining the members of their congregations. They don't like that. And oftentimes we might find various arguments for why the elders shouldn't have disciplined someone. You didn't have a good attitude about it. You should have been kinder. It wasn't the right time. You didn't take enough time with those people. Oftentimes, by the time you know about it and you're hearing about it, the elders have been dealing with it for a while. And they've been talking about it and trying to come to an understanding about it. And then by the time you hear about it and then they make a decision, it seems like a very short amount of time. They're not making decisions by the end of the day or by the next day like God did. When we start to complain about the way that God's will works, there's a reason why God has put discipline, whether it's self-discipline or church discipline, or any other part of his will. For instance, how we've been worshiping this morning. When we start to complain and we start to wish that things were different, even though it's not been established by the will of God, we're setting ourselves up on a very slippery slope. And usually, slippery slopes, there's no other way but down. And you'll fall into an abyss. Instead of standing on the high ground where God is. Everyone has a role. And that role has been established by his will. I don't know all the reasons that God has done it, but he's decided it. And if you're going to complain about that, God has no other answer for you than Numbers chapter 16. God is deadly serious about this. But while we're sitting here, and this episode it seems kind of negative toward God, right? We see God in a negative light here. I think we're forgetting when we think of God simply in a negative light from Numbers 16. Why is God so angry? God's not angry here because he's an angry being. He's angry because a group of men who should have known better took it upon themselves to decide what God should want. Wouldn't that make you angry? That when God has given you a role and you're trying to do it to the best of your ability and you're being really humble about it, and then somebody comes up to you and says, "You arrogant pig, we need to do things differently." Wouldn't that make you angry? It's God who is the judge, but it's the people who are at fault. And the sad thing is, we make these choices all the time. There are millions and billions of people out there who make these decisions all the time, who act like Korah, Dathan, and Abiram all the time. God is patient. Look at all God has done to get them to where they are. Don't complain. Don't buck. Find out what the will of God is and do it. It's a very simple prime directive. It's your job this morning, if you haven't done it already, to count the cost. This comes from one of Jesus' parables about a man who started to build his barn and realized that he didn't have the materials that he needed. He didn't count what he needed, the cost of building this barn or this silo, depends on your translation, but he didn't count the cost. And so then he left it unfinished. And if you go to your maker without making it right, you've left your building unfinished. And a building that's unfinished is fit for no one. And I promise you, and if you want help with the accounting, I will. Count the cost of what it's like to be without God. To be without the God that's spoken to us in the Bible. Without the God who's declared us who He is, what He wants for us. How, yes, He has wrath, but He also has love and mercy. That God, count what it's like without Him. And it's not that hard to find out how much it really costs. Turn on your TV. Turn on the news. Open your phone. Look at your next door neighbor and tell me what that cost looks like. Count it. You're going to find that it is far better, far more cost-effective for your soul to be one with this God. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, they didn't want to do the will of God. But if you do, if you want to do the will of God, if you want to be who He wants you to be, you'll never have to worry about being in Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's position. You never have to worry about that. Because all you want is what God wants. And all you want is to have a relationship with Him. I promise you that's going to cost you less in the long run. Again, if you want help with the accounting, you can come talk to me. I'll be back there. But as we sing this song, you're going to have the opportunity to say, yes, I have counted the cost. And I realize that being a child of God is far better. Because what's waiting for you, if you're not, is finding yourself face to face with Korah. And I guarantee you, he's going to be looking back at you saying, how did you not learn from my mistake? You can learn from his mistake this morning. Don't be hard-hearted like Korah. Soften your heart and come to the Lord having counted the cost. Please do that this morning as we stand and as we sing.